Six Flags Over Georgia is the fourth park I visited out of the Six Flags chain. This park is home to a diverse range of rides and coasters that are distinct from those found in my Texas home parks, while still being marred by that corporate Six Flags feeling. Unlike Frontier City, Six Flags Over Georgia is the main attraction for coaster enthusiasts in the area. But just like that Oklahoma park, Over Georgia left me with the want of a new coaster that could really boost their lineup. I'll explain what I mean by that and give you my coaster count for this awesome park. My name is Avery, and this is United Coasters. Before I begin, I want to take this opportunity to give a shout out to a great coaster community called the Melanin Coaster Network. They're a group of coaster enthusiasts who aim to highlight people of color and minorities in the coaster community. This group is free to join, open to everyone, and if it wasn't for their Hot Atlanta event, I would have never had the experience I did at Six Flags Over Georgia. I'm not sponsored to say any of this, but I will leave a link to their Facebook group page if you're interested in learning more about them. Georgia Flags, later renamed Six Flags Over Georgia, opened in early May 1967 as the second Six Flags park. This opening cemented Six Flags as a true pioneer in chain park operations. Today, Six Flags Over Georgia is home to 12 roller coasters, but the new Kid Flash Dueling Family Coaster wasn't open when I was there. Along with not getting that credit for this trip, I also missed out on the Dagganola Mine Train and Joker's Funhouse. And that's all the more reason to come back again soon, especially because some of these coasters are worth being put in my top 10. But I'm starting today's count with one that probably won't even crack my top 40 in Georgia Scorcher. This is one of the few remaining original B&M stand-up coaster models, where you're locked into a standing position while on the ride. I'll have more of a cohesive description on how the forces affected my body after explaining the layout, but from that first drop, I wanted to get off this ride. After rising up the 107-foot lift hill, you do a gradual drop of 101 feet into a vertical loop. Almost immediately after, there's a rise up to the right and down to the left into a turnaround that didn't seem to do much. The same forceless maneuver is then reversed, going up to the left and down, straightening out into the next part of the course. A short rise into an outward right wave follows before entering the final inversion, a low to the ground corkscrew. After that, you wrap around over the lift hill and enter into an S-bend that descends downward to the right, going under the lift hill before stopping at the final brakes. Now, let's talk about my abysmal experience on this ride. Despite experiencing some never before felt forces in my body due to the standing seats, I felt that the uncomfort and headbanging grossly overshadowed Georgia Scorcher's gimmick. Although the seats did allow you to adjust your standing height in the station, the flexibility is short-lived once the ride starts because it locks you into that height you last adjusted it to. This means on parts of the ride that give out positive or negative forces, you're either pressed up into your shoulders or experiencing all that force on your feet. I knew that SeaWorld Orlando's Pipeline coaster was set to fix the pitfalls of the original B&M stand-up models, so when I eventually ride that coaster, I'll have a better understanding of just how far they come with this model. In terms of color scheme, the red color is vibrant in the skyline, and the loosely themed entrance does help with the overall aesthetic, albeit if anybody wanted to actually ride it. I had a chance to ride this coaster with the MCN group before the park opened and considered that the lack of attendance was due to that fact. But later, when the park did open, the line was still short, most likely due to its reputation of being very uncomfortable. This is telling, especially considering that it's the first major ride that you encounter after entering the park. With that being said, I did give it the benefit of the doubt and run it multiple times thinking that discomfort had something to do on my end. But after 2 more redemption rides, I can only recommend this for the credit alone. Next up, I got on one of the most unconventional roller coasters that I've ridden so far, Daredevil Dive. This girl-style Eurofighter is plagued by bad capacity and has what feels like a thrown-together set of elements. Although this seems like a bad thing, I actually had a lot of fun on this coaster. After strapping onto the dart-shaped train, you depart the station to the right and enter a 95-foot-tall lift hill that has you staring straight up into the sky. An insight I got while riding this, and one that I mentioned on my video about Iron Shark, is that not being able to see the track in front of you adds so much to the excitement and fear factor. It's only when you crest over the hill that you see what you're in for, starting out with that insane 95 degrees beyond vertical drop. After that first drop, you fly past 2 prop rings of fire as you rise up and flip right into a dive loop. You then go up and enter into a bank right turn that kills off a little bit of the coaster speed. That speed is quickly regained as you drop back down and pull up into an Immelman. After turning left, you enter into the mid-course brake run. This part of the ride kind of stalled the enjoyment for me, because after leaving the brakes, the coaster really slows down, making the second half of the ride a slog to go through. You descend to the left, transitioning to the right, doing one of the slowest S-bends I've ever experienced. This leads into the right turn that goes into a tunnel. Upon exiting the tunnel, you're immediately turning to the right to undergo the final element, a slow heartline roll. And because the coaster was so slow, I could feel the blood rushing to my head a little bit before the ride levels out and dips, leading you into the brakes. As I said before, Daredevil Dive is fun at times, but I feel that most of the fun is experienced at the beginning of the ride rather than throughout it. Nevertheless, the theming stands as a shining point for this coaster. I don't typically expect the greatest ride theming at Six Flags parks, so when even a little effort is put in, I am truly surprised. In this case, Six Flags Over Georgia went the extra mile in terms of theming throughout the track layout with the flame rings, the tunnel, and the control tower. All that coincides with the color scheme of the bright red, white, silver, and black. It's yet another fire-related coaster in this park, but it's one that lives up to the name with such an extreme first drop that goes over the entrance of the ride. And with all that being said, I still can only see the ride trains as paper airplanes. Let me know if you think the same in the comments. Oh, and subscribe while you're there too. Heading into the DC named roller coasters, we have Batman the Ride. And after being on so many clone versions of the coaster, there isn't really that much I can say about it anymore that you haven't already heard. Don't get me wrong, it's a phenomenal coaster that has some great elements on a relatively small footprint, but it's a clone. I still ride these coasters at least once at every park that has one, simply because it is a fun ride experience. Moving on, we go to a statement roller coaster in Riddler's Mindbender. Seated deep in the woods and terrain stands the 80-foot tall Schwarzkopf coaster. First opened in 1978, this coaster, formerly known as just Mindbender, underwent a massive refurbishment in 2021. This included restoring sections of the track, a fresh coat of Riddler green paint, and new trains courtesy of B&M. The new trains reduced the standard Schwarzkopf capacity of 7 rows of 2x2 seating to only 5 rows of 2x2 seating, but that trade-off added a big boost of modern feeling to ride comfort. These improvements were definitely noticeable to me because after riding, I couldn't even tell that this coaster was over 45 years old. Due to its location and terrain, this coaster is one of a kind. You exit the station being pushed forward by dry tires before you enter the lift hill. After rising up, you turn right and undergo a slight dip to the right. You then bank left, slightly lifting before heading down the 80-foot drop into the coaster's first of 2 inversions, a 55-foot tall vertical loop. Upon exiting the loop, you're thrown up and to the left, getting a little breathing time before twisting back down to the right. And when I say down, I mean it. You are almost touching the ground before you thrust back up into the sky. The unexpected speed and lateral forces on this part of the ride squished me into my seat the entire time. The coaster then slows down on the crest of a hill before dropping again into a standard turnaround. And it's at this part where the famous division between people's rating of the coaster occurs. While exiting the turnaround, you come across a set of trim brakes that tremendously slow the train down to a halt. Even though the stop is less than a few seconds, all the forces of the ride before the drop are gone. However, the trim brakes didn't hit that hard for me as it does in most POVs. Regardless, the train drops into its last inversion, another vertical loop at the same height. You then rise into a tunnel that brings you out to the right, stopping at the final brakes. Despite its lack of variety in ride elements, I had to give Riddler's Mindbender some slack considering its age and track layout limitations. In terms of this ride manufacturer, I consider Riddler's Mindbender a better ride than Silver Bullet in Frontier City and way better than Shockwave at Over Texas. Both the seating and terrain added to an overall great ride experience. To top it all off, Riddler's Mindbender is also touted as a good starter roller coaster for new enthusiasts, and I could not agree more. We move on from the third oldest coaster in the park to the second oldest in Great American Scream Machine. And before you look it up, Over Georgia's oldest currently operating coaster is Dagonola Mine Train, which I didn't get the luxury to ride during my visit. Staying back on topic for this PTC wooden coaster, Great American Scream Machine just turned 50 years old in 2023, but due to some great TLC, it feels like new. This coaster exhibits a common out and back layout, but does so over a lake, making it have some of the best natural scenery in the park. I also want to note right off the bat the standout patriotic colors this coaster boasts and how stunning it looks when reflected by the water below. Alright, enough about the aesthetics, let's talk about the ride experience. After turning to the right out of the station and traversing the slow lift hill, you plunge down an 89-foot drop that bottoms out right over the water. You then rise turning to the right to start the out and back portion. This coaster traverses 2 small bunny hills that deliver some great moments of floater airtime. That part ends as you go into a turnaround, allowing time to catch your breath. After you get thrown down to another set of hills that give out flowjector airtime before going up to the left, hugging the start of that out and back part. You then level out to undergo 3 low to the ground speed hills before you hit the brake run. Great American Scream Machine is a great conventional roller coaster picturesquely located over a lake. The track layout feels so secluded and offers a long, enjoyable ride experience. If you've never been on a roller coaster or know someone who hasn't, I recommend Great American Scream Machine as yet another great beginner roller coaster. We're going back to DC themed coasters again for arguably one of the best coasters in this park and in my top 3 for Over Georgia and Superman Ultimate Flight. Standing out as the main attraction in the DC themed area with an iconic red and blue Superman color scheme is the beloved B&M Flyer. I already went into lengths about how I believe that the Flyer is one of the best rides in terms of unconventional seating, and this coaster just cemented it as one of my all-time favorite models. Considering that this was the first B&M Flyer model ever, I had to give this manufacturer some credit for creating a ride so unique and imposing from the get-go. You start off with your seats tucking up underneath the track, leaving you in a dangling position with your face towards the ground. The ride then leaves the station to undergo a 106-foot tall lift hill. After cresting, you swoop down right, straightening out into the first of 2 inversions, the iconic pretzel loop. I cannot stress to you enough how stunning this element is to look at and how forceful it is to experience it. Diving down headfirst a 106-foot drop only to then lay on your back before rising up is one of the most surreal moments I've had on a roller coaster. You then take gradual left and right turns as Superman travels under its first drop, turning left into a tunnel. After exiting, you begin a sharp right turn that immediately goes into its last inversion, an inline twist. That ends straight into the brake run. If I could describe Superman Ultimate Flight in one word, it would be graceful. Despite it not being better than Manta at SeaWorld Orlando, its presence here at Six Flags Over Georgia allows for a great mix to the lineup and a solid inclusion for the park's top 3 coasters. Another inclusion for the park's top 3 would undoubtedly go to the RMC hybrid Twisted Cyclone. Although it has a shorter ride experience than the likes of New Texas Giant and Iron Rattler, The RMC conversion of Georgia Cyclone packs a punch for what it has, and the fact that this coaster does so much in such a small footprint just exemplifies the attention to track design that RMC has done over the years. With a color scheme that Haikuge totally ripped off, Twisted Cyclone tandems blue track with white supports, contrasting everything around the area. You start off dropping to the left and entering into a pre-lift section that gives off some great lateral forces with its off-axis mini hills. Just a tease of what's to come as it levels out, rising into the 100-foot lift hill. The drop then starts by leaning you out to the right, then twisting you to the left before the end of the drop. I don't fully know why, but this part threw me off every time I rode it because it looks like it should be a straight drop for me. Immediately after, you rise up into a step-up underflip that whips you upside down before ending by turning to the right. You barely have time to catch your breath as you descend by doing a barrel roll down drop. I feel like both of these inversions complement each other and are way better than a conventional turnaround. After that drop, you pop up into a wave turn that gives out insane lateral forces during the descent and twist out. You then go up into a left turn, traveling over another small hill that sends you low to the ground, all the while giving out great moments of ejector airtime. It's there where you enter the last inversion of the ride, a 0G roll. This element is so close to the ground, which just adds to the excitement. After exiting, the coaster goes over 2 speed hills before banking left into an off-axis S hill and hitting the brake run. Despite its track length, Wicked Cyclone is a complete roller coaster. It's jam-packed with moments of airtime and is yet another contender for one of the best rides in the park. Just know that this coaster runs the best in the heat of the day, so be sure to ride it when it warms up. Also, it does tend to draw a line, so expect to wait on busy days. The second to last roller coaster that I visited was Blue Hawk. You know, that coaster that was featured on the 2015 movie Vacation as its former name Ninja, and no, I didn't get stuck on it like they did. Currently, Blue Hawk ditched the original theme and color scheme for an all-blue track layout and loosely based itself on aviation. This 5-inversion Vekoma Looper was actually a relocated coaster known as Kamikaze at Dinosaur Beach in Wildwood, New Jersey. Blue Hawk is stationed high above the lake where the majority of the ride takes place. After exiting right and going up the 122-foot lift hill, you gradually turn down to the right and enter into a double inversion element called the Butterfly. This inversion is essentially a tighter cobra roll and acts as such, except the end of the element has you facing the same way you originally entered. Leaving that element, you turn down left and start a Sidewinder loop element that starts to the left but ends you facing to the right, where you then take a slow bank to the left to enter into the final set of inversions, a mesmerizing double corkscrew. After that, Blue Hawk kinda just weaves into the brake run. Although it is yet another coaster that's over 30 years old at this park, it is surprisingly smooth. I was expecting the transitions and double corkscrew to jerk me around a bit, but it was pretty enjoyable. Due to its position towards the back of the park, I do feel like Blue Hawk is definitely an afterthought for coaster enthusiasts, but I would recommend going on this. It's definitely worth your time. Lastly, we'll take a look at the tallest roller coaster in the state of Georgia, the appropriately named Goliath. With its max height at 200 feet, but its highest drop only 175 feet, many enthusiasts argue that this B&M is considered a hypercoaster. In this case, I lean on the manufacturer's description that Goliath is a hypercoaster. Regardless of its classification, it would be hard to argue how long the layout is. Goliath has a length of 4,480 feet of track. That's over 400 feet longer than Superman at Fiesta Texas, and just 800 feet short of a mile. Despite Goliath's station being at the middle of the front of the park, this hypercoaster has a majority of its layout past the entrance to Over Georgia. That being said, you'd be inclined to think that this would be a parking lot coaster, but instead, its blue and orange layout is placed in a field in front of the park. With 4-cross seating secured by only a lap bar, you depart left and immediately enter into that aforementioned 200-foot tall chain lift hill that drops down into one of the many floater airtime hills. This hill immediately descends to the left, giving you some crushing G-forces that press you into your seat. After ascending, Goliath drops down again over the middle of a lake, with you out of your seat the entire time. Next, you go back up, entering a helix that gives off some pretty mild forces. The ride bottoms out to enter into another camelback, giving you the last moment of floater airtime before entering a horseshoe turn that starts the return trip. It's here where the coaster undergoes 3 bunny hills that give some great moments of ejector airtime. This part of the ride is without a doubt the most intense part because all of these airtime hills threw me out of my seat with such tenacity. After that part, you swing left before hitting the last drop that sends you into the brakes. It cannot be overstated though when I tell you that last little drop causes yet another fierce moment of ejector airtime. In terms of the layout, Goliath's main strength has got to be the airtime rather than the positive G's at the bottom of drops. That's because when I compare that aspect with Titan at Six Flags Over Texas, that coaster was causing me to gray out on the helixes. I rode Goliath in the front and the back, and I can confirm that the back seats will give you the absolute best moments of airtime. Goliath dominates the park, and is yet another contender for one of the top 3 roller coasters at Over Georgia. Six Flags Over Georgia is an exceptional amusement park that boasts an impressive array of roller coasters in every direction. When I was there, the only gripes that I did have was the lack of more family coasters and the lack of a launch coaster. But with Kid Flash being built and the 2024 Intamin Ultra Surf Coaster coming out, those problems are definitely a thing of the past. That being said, I can truly say that this park is perfectly balanced. Six Flags Over Georgia is a must visit for coaster enthusiasts and can stand on its own as the park to visit in the state. If you've been to this park or plan on visiting it later this year, let me know in the comments below. And if you stuck around this long, consider subscribing to keep up with all my videos. Lastly, I just want to say thank you for watching, and remember to stay united.